Welcome back to a further episode of Men's Inner Health with Mark Randall. In today's conversation, I'd really like to start exploring a little bit more about the pressure that we men put on ourselves and the impact that that can have on our ability to internally cope with what's going on in the world and what's going on inside with ourselves. It's an incredible pressure that we men can place on ourselves. That pressure can be huge. You know, when we enter into fatherhood, oh my Lord, I've got to put a roof over the head, food on the table. The provider archetype kicks in and we become really driven with go, 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 go. I cannot fail. I cannot let my family down. And we do really well most of the time at work. But there are times where with all this pressure, we can't always cope. And when we don't cope, we men tend to carry shame for that. Oh, if I'm not coping, oh, what's wrong with me? I'm useless. There's no conversations about, hey, self-care, about, hey, can we slow down and take some time out and recharge the batteries? But I know we've just got to keep pushing through. And sometimes we'll find that deep down that's going to have a real massive impact on our self-worth, our self-esteem, our ability to cope, because we can't always cope. But there's this societal pressure that men have put on themselves, or society's put on us, who knows, that we've always got to be coping. When we don't cope, Lordy, that's not a good sign for us men. What's wrong with me? Feeling useless, feeling hopeless, feeling helpless, feeling powerlessness. You know, they're not easy zones of being for the old male ego to be in, because powerlessness, oh, yeah. Where do I go with this? What do I do with this? How do I acknowledge this within myself? We don't want to acknowledge it. We'll push it into the shadow and just get pissed off and frustrated with ourselves. Learning to accept and come into an acceptance. There are times where we're just not going to cope. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with knowing that sometimes we're not going to cope? Instead of making it a pressure point, how can we come into a deeper acceptance that there are times in life where we're not going to cope? Yeah, when we're not going to cope, I think we men, our internal dialogue is saying, oh, I've failed, I'm never good enough, I'm not reaching. Pause on that. How do you notice that incessant inner dialogue that's caning the shit out of yourself when you're experiencing a period of not coping? You know, when we're not coping, we can get flat. You know, we can feel disappointed, we can feel sad, we can feel empty, we can feel that just nothing's going right for us at that point in time. But technically that's not true. It's just a small moment in time where we're not coping. Now, in that small moment of time where we're not coping, I wonder whether we over-embellish it, over-catastrophize, and then the cannons come out, the internal cannons come out and, yeah, kicking the mickey out of ourselves. How do we just learn to accept physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually that sometimes we aren't going to cope with life, the world and the universe? What can we do different? When we don't cope, we men tend to retreat to the cave, the metaphorical cave. We don't put our hands up. We don't acknowledge, oh, hang on, I'm not coping. We don't put our hands up for that. Our partners might say, hey, what's wrong? We'll say, nothing, I'm fine. When in fact we're not. Yes, to put up our hands and admit that we're not coping in that moment or in that period of time is accepting the various different aspects of ourself. When we're not coping, how often do we just stop and ask ourselves an internal question instead of an internal beat up narrative that we're familiar to and used to? How can we begin to do the opposite? Internally, when we're not coping, intuitively, can we ask ourselves, hey, what do I need right now? What does my well-being need in this present moment? And how do we start to action, listening to the intuitive knowledge within ourselves? Intuitively, when you're not coping, what would your intuition say? Old patterns might say, I'm not coping, so therefore go to the man cave and drink a few sherbets or smoke a few scoos, whatever the case may be, or just shut down. But instead of doing that, by listening to our intuitive inner wisdom, our intuitive inner essence, what could it do differently when we're not coping? When we're not coping, do we need to call in and just say, hey, I need a mental health care day? Take a day off. What self-care might you need in that experience of not coping? Is there a good mate that's not going to judge you, who knows you well? Could you ring and talk to him? Or could you go around and see him and just talk it out? Express what's going on. Could you talk to your partner? Could you go and see your personal life coach or your therapist or whoever the case may be? And learning to change the dialogue around not coping. When we're not coping, we're not failures. It's just a period in time where we can just get overwhelmed. And when we get overwhelmed energetically, that's hard work. And energetically, our energy is not flowing as appropriately as it could be. But how do we slow it down, come into a deeper acceptance physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, that it's okay sometimes to not cope? It's not the end of the world. How do we learn to begin to care for that part of ourselves? When we're not coping here, we can feel really overwhelmed. We can feel helpless. There can be a sense of hopelessness or a feeling of hopelessness in the here and now, but we can catastrophize that a little bit. How do we stop and begin the process of inner self-reflection? Not the old style of kicking ourselves, but a new style of inner self-reflection, listening to that intuitive inner wisdom, that intuitive unconditional love that we have for everybody else except for ourselves. Perhaps it is time for us men to start opening up to a deeper inner self-reflection. Be gentle and enjoy.